As many of us know all too well, having a sibling isn't always fun and games. Siblings for the most part end up fighting at some point, whether this be over disagreements in the household, a need to establish dominance, or simply a clash of personalities. Sibling rivalries are certainly not uncommon, and in some cases may actually be beneficial in terms of cultivating growth, resiliency, and perhaps, in the long term, a greater bond between the two children. But the relationships between siblings so far in the Bible have proven to be adversarial at best. And whether you consider Cain killing Abel, or the animosities between Isaac and Ishmael, brothers generally prove to be at odds with each other. So it comes as no surprise really that the sons of Isaac, Esau and Jacob, would come to experience more of the same, especially considering their last encounter in Genesis 25, where Jacob, the younger brother, pressures Esau into selling him his birthright by bribing him with food. We've understood already from Genesis 25 that Esau and Jacob were both very different men, with Esau preferring to go out into the wild to hunt, and Jacob preferring to stay at home in the tents. Both parents recognized such a stark difference between the two that they even preferred one over the other respectively, with Isaac favoring Esau and Rebekah favoring Jacob. In fact, we can interpret the difference between the two by simply looking at their characteristics, with Esau being more adventurous and outgoing, if not a little simple, and Jacob being introvert and hermit-like, if not a little scheming. The end of Genesis 26 identifies the simplicity of Esau in his fondness of flesh, as we are told that he went ahead and married 2 wives in Judith and Elon, both of whom were Hittite women. The simple notion of greed is established here, with Esau taking 2 wives and essentially demonstrating adultery and fornication. But it also shows us that he had no real regard for Abraham's views on marriage, in that he did not wish for his descendants to marry the women of Canaan. Whether or not Isaac enforced this rule upon his sons is unclear, but it is clear that both he and Rebekah were against his marriages, for the Bible tells us that both women were a source of grief for them. Jacob, on the other hand, remains suspiciously absent in this passage, and we do not receive any mention of any women in his life at this point, perhaps an indication of how much time he spent alone in the tents, with only his own company. Chapter 27 of Genesis opens up by telling us that Isaac had grown so old that his eyes had become weak, and he could no longer see. Like Abraham before him, he had lived a good and long life under the protection of his God, but even he could not be saved from the gradual decline of his body, and so he yielded to his fate and sought to put his affairs in order, knowing that his death was on the horizon. With this, he summoned his oldest son Esau to his tent, and told him, "I am now an old man, and don't know the day of my death. Now then, get your equipment, your quiver and bow, and go out to the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food I like, and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my blessing before I die." Here we see Isaac wish to eat one last meal prepared by his favourite son. It becomes obvious here that Isaac thinks quite highly of Esau, despite his supposed fornication with the Canaanite women, and that he treasures the fact that Esau, unlike his brother, was a successful hunter. He indulges himself in his son's hobby and talent, and glorifies him and him alone. Despite having lost the birthright to his younger brother Jacob, Isaac still appears to honour Esau, and rejects the notion that Jacob was at all more worthy. In fact, he even rejects the testament by God to Rebekah that the older will serve the younger, and ignores any of the spiritual wisdom that he would have otherwise heeded. Such was the love that Isaac held for Esau, that he turned a blind eye to both his son's flaws in marrying pagan women, and the words of God, who had witnessed Esau despise his birthright when selling it to Jacob. Whilst this was happening inside the tent, we are told that Rebekah was listening, and that when Esau left the tent to go and hunt for his father's meal, Rebekah ran and told Jacob of what she had learned. Of course, we do not know whether Rebekah was actively spying on her husband and son, or whether she just happened to overhear their conversation, but there is most definitely a sense here that there was a lack of trust within Isaac's household. Furthermore, we see Rebekah hang around long enough for Esau to leave, implying that whether or not she came upon the conversation by chance, she did eavesdrop for the duration of what was meant to be a private conversation between Isaac and Esau. The Bible tells us, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "Look, I overheard your father say to your brother Esau, 'Bring some game and prepare me some tasty food to eat, so that I may give you my blessing in the presence of the Lord before I die.'" It was bad enough that Rebekah had eavesdropped on the conversation at all, but now she goes a step further and passes that information on to Jacob. Though she does not do this out of simple gossip. That would have perhaps been more forgivable, but instead goes yet another step further and produces a plan to sabotage Esau's receiving of the blessing. She tells Jacob, "Now my son, listen carefully and do what I tell you. Go out to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats, so I can prepare some tasty food for your father, just the way he likes it. Then take it to your father to eat, so that he may give you his blessing before he dies." Here we see how Rebekah comes to mirror the deceitfulness and impatience of Sarah, whereby they engineer their own schemes in order to hasten God's plan. We saw Sarah do this when she encourages Abraham to sleep with Hagar, so that she can have a son, and thus actualize the covenant. In this case of Rebekah, we see her plot to actualize God's words that the older will serve the younger, or that Esau would serve Jacob. Neither of these women show that they trust God here, hence why they take it upon themselves to exact the reality they want, even if this means acting mendaciously. Furthermore, it is no secret that Rebekah loved Jacob more, and so it can be said that she acts from a place of selfishness in order to get what she wants. So deceptive is Rebekah's plan that she shows to have considered every angle. She tells Jacob that she will make the food that his father loves, and because she knows him so well, she knows exactly how to prepare the meal he expects from Esau. With this, Rebekah accepts full responsibility for the plan, and does not allow Jacob to dirty his hands with the preparation of this scheme. Interestingly, it should also be noted that despite praising Esau's hunting skills and glorifying his cooking, Isaac proves not to actually be able to tell the difference between his son's cooking and his wife's, suggesting that in actuality, he didn't think that much of Esau's ability at all, but that his love for him blinded him into thinking he was greater than he actually was. Still, one might argue that Esau in this endeavour was still greater than Jacob, for Jacob shows a lack of any virtue, nor even initiative, given that he does nothing here except bring the food to Isaac and pretend to be Esau. Yet again we are privy to a more spineless side of Jacob, who amongst sitting at home in the tents, can't even execute the plan without his mother's intervention. This is quite confounding, given that we don't see him miss a beat when it comes to obtaining the birthright from Esau. In that instance, he appeared to be quick-witted and somewhat conniving, but here he appears lost, witless, and if anything, quite cowardly. We see him panic over even the slightest details of the plan, telling his mother, "But my brother Esau is a hairy man, while I have smooth skin. What if my father touches me? I would appear to be tricking him, and would bring down a curse upon myself rather than a blessing." With this, we also see how willing he is to go along with the plan, for his misgivings are not reserved for the fact that this is immoral or unrighteous, but instead for how he might be caught. he appears to show little regard for taking advantage of his father, and instead seems only concerned with how he will be exposed if his father touches him. To placate his worries and to reassure him that he will not be in any trouble, Rebekah even promises to take the blame, telling him, "My son, let the curse fall on me. Just do what I say. Go and get them for me." What's interesting here is that Rebekah is willing to bear the brunt of the repercussions should anything go wrong, and this could be a demonstration of her love for Jacob, for such deception would surely alienate her husband at such a crucial point in both her life and his own. Furthermore, she is willing to face the potential curse from God on behalf of Jacob, which again shows us how far she is willing to go for her son, and what she is willing to risk in order to ensure his success. Yet some might point out Rebekah's arrogance here, that she assumes the responsibility for the sin by nominating herself, and thus taking it out of the hands of God again. With this superseding of her God's authority, it's quite easy to unpick the hubris in Rebekah's character, which serves to show believers that even those who were once righteous and noble can also stray into doing dishonest things if they are not careful. So once Rebekah has assured Jacob enough, he goes out and fetches the items that she had requested. She prepared the meal for Isaac, supposedly in the exact way he liked it, and then proceeded to dress Jacob in Esau's clothes. In order to replicate the hairiness of Esau, she covered Jacob's hands and neck with a goat skin, so that of course, if Isaac touched him, he would not be alerted that he was indeed conversing with the wrong son. As we can see, this whole episode was orchestrated by Rebekah, and whilst Jacob is indeed guilty for having carried it out, it is uncertain whether or not he would have had the sense nor the gall to attempt it alone. Jacob went to his father once the food had been prepared, and with his disguise, he entered Isaac's tent and announced himself as Esau. He tells his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you've told me. Please sit up and eat some of my game, so that you may give me your blessing." But Isaac, despite being weary and old, did have some of his wits left, as he queries, "How did you find it so quickly, my son?" Shrewdly, and perhaps a sign of his more cunning ways, Jacob replied, "The Lord your God gave me success." But still Isaac is not convinced, and we can see here that he definitely suspected something was amiss. He asks his son, "Come near so I can touch you, my son, to know whether you really are my son Esau or not." One might say that it was on the account that Esau and Jacob sounded nothing alike that kind of gave the game away, and that even in his decrepit state, it was Isaac's eyes that had failed him, but not his ears. This is confirmed when Jacob approaches Isaac, and upon being touched is told, "The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau." With this, Isaac becomes convinced that this is Esau, given that his hands were hairy. The Bible tells us he did not recognize him, for his hands were hairy like those of his brother Esau, so he proceeded to bless him. Yet even after this, Isaac still feels like something is amiss, as he asks yet again, "Are you really my son Esau?" However, we see Jacob is fully committed to the lie, and without hesitation responds with, "I am." He proceeds to bring the food to Isaac that had been prepared by Rebekah, and the Bible tells us that he also supplemented this with wine, which Isaac drank. Afterwards, Isaac, still in doubt as to whether this was Esau or not, asks him to come close and kiss him. It is believed that Isaac, who could not trust his eyes, came to doubt his ears as well. He had even felt his son's hands and was still not convinced. In fact, one might argue that having tasted the food, he was able to derive some difference between Esau's and Rebekah's. So with his last remaining sense, he uses his nose when Jacob comes to kiss him, and breathes in deep to catch a whiff of his clothes. It might be said that Isaac showed both gumption and caution in using all of his senses, and that perhaps this was an indication of how little he trusted his own family and those around him. But Rebekah's ruse proves to be too well thought out for Isaac, for after smelling the clothes of Esau, he becomes certain that this can be no other man. "Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed," he announces, before proceeding to give Jacob exactly that which he wanted. "May God give you heaven's dew and earth's richness, an abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you and peoples bow down to you. Be lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed." So here we see the controversial yet irrefutable event of Jacob inheriting the blessings of Isaac. Those that would recognize him as the spiritual head of the family. As we can see, Jacob is promised the riches of the earth, the abundance of crops, and the prospects of new wine. Other nations will bow before him, and he will be lord over his brothers, even Esau. As if he didn't need any more protection, he is made a boon that anyone who curses him will be cursed, thus safeguarding him from the rebuttals of his brother, and conversely, any who bless him will be blessed. The Bible then tells us that as soon as Jacob had finished getting the blessings and had left the tent, Esau returned home. He too had prepared the food as had been requested, and set it before Isaac to eat. He says to him, "My father, please sit up and eat some of my game, so that you may give me your blessing." Confused, Isaac asks him, "Who are you?" "I am your son," he answered, "your firstborn, Esau." The Bible tells us Isaac trembled violently and said, "Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it just before you came, and I blessed him, and indeed he will be blessed." We are under the assumption here that Isaac was so mortified over this that he shook violently, and was so overcome with emotion that he began to convulse. He knows that the blessing is irrefutable, and that it cannot be undone, and so he can do very little except voice the hopelessness of the situation. In fact, one might say that even if he could renounce the blessing and give it back to Esau, he would not have, for Isaac may have seen this as God's will, and despite his favoritism to Esau, realized that when God had told Rebekah that the older son would serve the younger, he was being serious. Esau does not hide his disappointment, and he bursts out with a loud and bitter cry, and said, "Bless me too, my father." With this, Isaac confirms, "Your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing," showing us that he did indeed understand exactly what had transpired, and despite his old age, was now well aware that Jacob had disguised himself as Esau. But Esau is relentless and demands, "Isn't he rightly named Jacob? This is the second time he has taken advantage of me. He took my birthright, and now he's taken my blessing." Here we see that both father and son are horrified over what Jacob has done, to the point that Esau reflects on the previous time that Jacob had manipulated him. Many would sympathize with Esau, given that he does in fact come across as the victim in both scenarios. What Isaac had meant for Esau as the oldest son was pounced upon by Jacob the younger, and what's more, Jacob had acquired both birthright and blessing through rather questionable means. However, there are those that believe Jacob was justified in these approaches, and there is an argument that because God had predicted that the older brother would serve the younger, Jacob was merely facilitating his words, albeit rather sneakily. Another proposal is that Esau did not see the birthright or the blessings as anything other than materialistic and political advantages, whereas Jacob understood their more spiritual and ancestral importance. In a sense, this argument sees Jacob as being more worthy of receiving the blessings from Isaac, and that because he was more spiritual in that sense than Esau was, he was justified in his acquisition. But in any case, Esau continues to express his frustrations as he turns to his father and asks him, "Haven't you reserved any blessings for me?" To which Isaac answers, "I have made him lord over you, and have made all his relatives his servants, and I have sustained him with grain and new wine. So what can I possibly do for you, my son?" Isaac acknowledges that there is nothing he can do, now that he has already given the blessing to Jacob, and perhaps it might be said that he may have finally surrendered to God's will, instead of trying his best to make Esau the inheritor of the blessing. There is a dejected tone to Isaac here, who shares his son's disappointment, and it seems that the rhetorical question here, "So what can I possibly do for you, my son?" is an admittance of his own shame for having been duped by Jacob, as well as an admittance of how incorrigible the situation has now become. Esau resorts to begging his father for even the slightest of blessings, and is seen to even weep over what has transpired. But Isaac is adamant that this is not possible now, and reveals the grim reality to Esau, telling him, "Your dwelling will be away from the earth's richness, away from the dew of heaven above. You will live by the sword, and you will serve your brother, but when you grow restless, you will throw his yoke from off your neck." Here we learn that Esau will live away from the earth's richness, or that he and his people will be nomads, and will surely not be those of any considerable wealth. He tells him that they will be away from the dew of heaven above, implying that they will be a godless people, and will not incur the protection nor guidance of the Lord. He is told that he will live by the sword, yet again another implication that Esau would live a hard life, one of turmoil and battle. He is also told that he will serve his brother, but that he will grow restless under these circumstances, and would in essence break free of such servitude. With this mini prophecy decided for Esau, it should come as no surprise that Esau would hate Jacob thereafter. The Bible tells us Esau held a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing his father had given him. He said to himself, "The days of mourning my father are near. Then I will kill my brother Jacob." We see here that Jacob's actions drove a wedge between them, and it was this that would fester such intense and negative feelings from one brother towards the other, to the extent that one was eager to kill the other. Echoes of Cain and Abel are seen here between Esau and Jacob, and the theme of brother killing brother becomes foreshadowed once more, perhaps in a more explicit way than with Cain and Abel. With Cain, his motivations to kill Abel were mostly to do with envy, and one might argue that killing Abel was much less a premeditated attack. But in this instance, Esau specifies that he wants to kill his brother, and even provides a time frame for which to do it, that being once his father has passed away. It might also be said that this was Esau's way of dealing with Isaac's death, and in some way it could be rationalized that Esau was killing Jacob to avenge the shame he had brought upon Isaac for having tricked him. But it's probable that Esau was thinking more from a selfish and angry side for having lost both the birthright and the blessing, and less for the honor of his father. The concept of revenge was comforting to Esau, given that it gave him relief from both feelings of inadequacy when compared to Jacob's cunning, and relief from the embarrassment of having to serve him at all. Him, the younger brother. Rebekah soon learns of what Esau intends to do, and with this information, she warns her favourite son Jacob. "Your brother Esau is planning to avenge himself by killing you. Now then, my son, do what I say. Flee at once to my brother Laban in Haran. Stay with him for a while until your brother's fury subsides. When your brother is no longer angry with you and forgets what you did to him, I'll send word for you to come back from there. Why should I lose both of you in one day?" Yet again, we see Rebekah stepping in to provide for her son, only this time, it is with more evasive action. She cannot bring herself to plot against Esau in a way that would threaten his life, and so the only option is to flee. "Why should I lose both of you in one day?" she expresses, perhaps suggesting that she could have inspired conflict, but then if Esau won the fight and killed Jacob, which would have most likely been the case given his skill as a hunter, then she would lose them both, on the account that she had already lost Esau courtesy of her scheming. Instead, sending Jacob away for a few days seemed like the more favourable outcome, and with this, she had hoped it would be enough time for Esau to calm down and forget about his grudge. Of course, we understand that these few days actually turn out to be more than 20 years. Rebekah convinces Isaac to send Jacob away under the guise that she is disgusted by the Hittite women around them. She declares, "I'm disgusted with living because of these Hittite women. If Jacob takes a wife from among the women of this land, from Hittite women like these, my life will not be worth living." Yet again, she's seen here to manipulate the weary Isaac, only this time it is so that he will send Jacob away to find a wife, and thus out of the reach of the vengeful Esau. It is unknown whether Rebekah really did hate the Hittite women, or whether she was just using this argument to convince Isaac to send Jacob away. You'll notice that she declares that if Jacob marries one of them, her life will not be worth living, and it could be said that she was indirectly threatening Isaac to send Jacob away, otherwise she would be depressed, and in the most extreme case, would take her own life. Unwilling to see his wife so unhappy, Isaac summons Jacob and agrees to send him away to his mother's land in Paddan Aram, where he instructs him to stay with Bethuel, his mother's father. He further instructs him to marry one of the daughters of Laban, his mother's brother, and to start a family of his own. The scheming of Rebekah is often underestimated, if not understated. She not only plays Esau by worming him out of his blessing, but also plays Jacob into acquiring that which she wants for him. Indeed, you might say that Jacob allows himself to be played in this fashion because it is exactly what he wants too, but none of this would have come to light had it not been for Rebekah's plotting. We see her most of all play her own husband Isaac by taking advantage of not only his declining health, but also his good nature, as she manipulates him into sending Jacob away. In any case, everything Rebekah had intended went according to plan, and we see Isaac not only send Jacob away, but also reiterate the blessing, telling him in Genesis 28, "May God Almighty bless you, and make you fruitful, and increase your numbers until you become a community of peoples. May he give you and your descendants the blessing given to Abraham, so that you may take your possession of the land where you now reside as a foreigner, the land God gave to Abraham." Now when Esau learns that Jacob has been sent away, we do not get an explanation as to exactly how he felt, though it can be assumed that he was even more enraged that he had been denied his opportunity for revenge. Along with this, he became aware that Jacob had been advised not to marry a Canaanite woman, something which, as we've discussed, was passed down from Abraham, who wanted to keep their lineage within their own community, for these were trusted to be God-fearing people. The Canaanites, on the other hand, according to Abraham, would lead men astray, and they would weigh their husbands down until eventually they too would begin to pray to their gods instead of the Lord. But Esau, who had already taken Canaanite wives, became aware in that moment of how they displeased his father, and so, perhaps in an effort to curry even more favour, and perhaps to avoid being outshone even more by Jacob, he went to Abraham's banished brother Ishmael, and married his daughter Mahalath, adding to his retinue of wives. In what could be described as a family breakup, We see from this story that whilst Jacob did obtain the blessings and Rebekah's scheme was successful, no one actually won. Isaac, Rebekah, Esau, and Jacob proved not to be such a noble family, given that in some capacity they schemed not only against each other but also against God. They reject the words and wisdom of God in favour of their own wants and desires, and even though God spells out quite clearly what is going to happen, the characters still try to employ their own tactics. With this, believers might derive the lesson that despite our own schemes and plots, regardless of how smart or well thought out they are, God's will is God's will, and no amount of planning or strategy can alter his mission. The breaking down of Isaac and Rebekah's family becomes something of a tragedy, given that by the end of it, none of them actually trust each other, and with good reason too. Perhaps even worse, none of them appear to trust their God, which is what sees them working against each other in the first place. Perhaps even ironically, the blessing that they each worked so hard to obtain had already been decided by God, and so it didn't matter in the end whether or not Isaac had blessed Esau with it or not, for it had already been decided by God that it would be given to Jacob, for better or worse. In essence, only God had the ability to give the blessing, and whilst it was Isaac who facilitated this, in the end, it was virtually out of his hands. As always, if you've enjoyed today's episode of Biblical Stories Explained, then don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe for more content just like this. Until next time.